and welcome to our lecture on learning. The first thing we'll talk about is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning occurs when a neutral stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus that causes an unconditioned response. An unconditioned stimulus reflects an environmental event that causes a reaction to an unlearned way. A neutral stimulus is an environmental event that does not produce the reaction that you're looking for, the reaction being studied. A conditioned stimulus involves an environmental event that creates a reaction after the learning has occurred and has the power to produce the conditioned response. Pavlov was a psychologist who believed that a reflex could be generated by an unrelated stimulus, as seen in this illustration to the right. Pavlov tested the basic principles of classical conditioning with his dogs. He would ring a bell and then feed dogs their food. He would continue this practice until he was able to ring the bell without any food present, and the dogs would begin to salivate. This shows that the dogs developed an association with the ringing of bell, and they learned that every time that bell rang, they were going to be fed. This is an example of classical conditioning. Another example is from the show The Office. When Jim would turn on his computer and make that ding, that Windows ding, and then offer Dwight an Altoid. He did this consistently and then eventually stopped giving the Altoid, turned the computer on, the ding comes, and then Dwight sticks out his hand, and Jim says, "Why are you sticking out your hand?" So this is another example of classical conditioning. The person or thing being conditioned is not aware or knows what you're doing or what you're trying to do. So you're taking something that is not associated. So in the case of the dog, the bell has no association to food whatsoever, but he created that association. The ding of a computer has no association with an Altoid, but you made that link and that other person wasn't aware that that's what you were trying to teach them or what they were learning. That is the classic conditioning, is them not being aware of what it is that you're trying to teach them. There's another experiment. This is named the Little Albert experiment. And this was a famous psychology experiment. It was conducted by a behavioralist, which is John B. Watson, and one of his graduate students, Rayner. Previously, Pavlov, sort of created the pathway and conducted experiments demonstrating the conditioning process in dogs. Well, Watson took that research a step further by showing that emotional reactions could also be classically conditioned in people. Little Albert was 9 months old, and Watson and Rayner exposed him to a series of stimuli. This included a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, masks, and burning newspaper, and observed the boy's reaction. Initially, the boy showed no reaction, no fear of any of the objects that he was being shown. Well, the next time little Albert was exposed to the rat, Watson made a very loud noise by hitting a metal pipe with a hammer. Naturally, the child began to cry after hearing this loud noise. After repeatedly pairing the white rat with the loud noise, Albert began to show the frightening noise. He sort of expected this noise every time he saw the white rat. Soon, Albert began to cry simply by seeing the rat. The loud noise didn't occur, but the crying occurred as soon as he saw that white rat. So that, again, is classical conditioning. He was not aware of what he was being conditioned to do, but he was, in fact, conditioned between the two. The next is operant conditioning. And this is our voluntary behaviors and how they can come to be controlled by the outcomes that they produce. Thorndike proposed the law of effect. He noticed that behaviors that lead to positive outcomes can be strengthened, while behaviors that lead to negative outcomes will become weakened. And this leads to the concept of reinforcement. And reinforcement is a process by which actions are strengthened, as well as an opposite process of punishment, which is the weakening of actions. Skinner introduced the term operant conditioning to distinguish this learning from classical conditioning. It's very different than classical conditioning. The animals or people are making a choice to respond to the environment in a certain way. Each choice produces some type of consequence. An example of this is Skinner's box. This was used to study operant behavior in a compressed time frame. The organism is automatically rewarded or punished for engaging in certain behaviors. The Skinner box is a chamber that isolates the subject from external environment. It has a behavior indicator such as a lever or a button, and when the animal pushes the button or pulls the lever, the box is able to deliver a positive reinforcement of behavior, such as food, or a punishment, such as a noise, or a token conditioner, such as a light. This is correlated with either the positive reinforcement or punishment. Although it can be difficult to view positive as discouraging behaviors and negative as encouraging behaviors, it's easy to catch on once you realize that when it comes to operant conditioning, the term positive and negative are not used in the manner that we generally think of them as. In this theory, positive does not necessarily mean good, and negative does not necessarily mean bad. A positive reinforcement, this is when the behavior leads to an addition of something pleasant. Positive reinforcement works by rewarding positive behaviors by adding a positive outcome. For example, giving a treat to a dog who sits in the classic positive reinforcement. Okay, so the dog sits, you give them a treat, positive reinforcement. By doing the desired behavior of sitting, a positive outcome, such as this treat, is added. Negative reinforcement, now the behavior is rewarded by the removal of something unpleasant. Negative reinforcement is a behavior management strategy that parents and teachers use with children oftentimes. It involves taking away something unpleasant in response to a stimulus. For example, imagine a child who doesn't want to do their homework. Their parent scolds and nags them about it, which the child finds unpleasant. When the child does their homework, which is the desired behavior, the parent stops their nagging. The unpleasant experience goes away. The child learns that the unpleasant experience will go away or will not happen if the homework is done when it needs to be done. Positive punishment occurs when a behavior results in the addition of something unpleasant. And this is the most challenging thing for a lot of people to sort of wrap their heads around. Spanking is a positive punishment. Spanking a child when they throw a tantrum is a classic example of positive punishment. The reason? Something is added to the mix. You're adding the spanking to discourage a bad behavior, which was throwing the tantrum. Negative punishment, this is where the behavioral leads to the removal of something pleasant. For example, two children get into a fight over who gets to play with their new toy. The parent simply takes the toy away from both children. This is an example of negative punishment. The comparison of classical and operant conditioning. So first is the nature of the response. Classical conditioning is involuntary and it's a reflex, where operant condition is voluntary and is often spontaneous. The timing of the learning, occurs in classical conditioning before the response, operant after the response. The role of the learner is passive in classical conditioning, inactive in operant conditioning. The nature of the learning, the neutral stimulus becomes a CS through the association, where the operant, the probability of making a response is altered by consequences that follow it. And then the learn expectancy is us will follow UC, and for